Hello everyone. Welcome to another live broadcast here at Project Control Academy. We are very glad to have you joining us today for another insightful session and another great discussion that we are going to have. So, who is ready to embark on an exciting journey into the landscape of contracts management today? Yes, that's a topic we haven't explored before, and I'm so excited about today's topic. So, in regards to contracts management, have you ever wondered how project controls directly can influence contract management strategies and practices? For those of you who are in project controls, you know that we always mention about the importance of the contract, reviewing our contract fully so that we know how to mitigate the risk, how to resolve the disputes in terms of change management, and a lot of things we go back to the contract. But have you thought about the other way around? How you can incorporate project controls principles into your contracts and into your contracts management practices firsthand? Well, that's what we are going to talk about today, and that's really a topic I'm very excited about. And today you are going to learn some strategies and best practices to integrate project controls into contracts management for enhancing the efficiency and cost effectiveness, minimizing the risk, and improving the collaboration between parties. So today, in today's session, you're about to explore how project controls directly influence project contract management, how you can integrate project control into contract administration, how project controls can directly help you, again, with enhancing practices in contract management. Not only that, how project controls can identify and mitigate contractual risks and ensuring kind of smooth project execution. We also talk about key performance indicators or KPIs to measure contracts management success through project controls. And what else we're talking about? How project controls methodologies help you to foster collaboration among all stakeholders, from contracts to contractors to clients, and much, much more. So these are just some of the topics that we are going to cover in today's session. I hope you are as excited as I am, because we're going to learn a ton out of today's session, something that perhaps you haven't explored before that much. But before I dive into this topic with our fantastic guest speaker, may I ask everyone to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and let us know who you are, from which country you are tuning in from, what your role is, and why you joined this session, what you would like to learn out of today's discussion. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We will be happy to see your comments and engagement as we go on. About me, I am Sharek Orbani, the founder and technical director of Project Control Academy, which is the leading global provider of training programs and resources in project controls. So, as for some housekeeping rules, the way that these sessions are conducted, they are more casual conversation with an expert on the topic. So, you're welcome to ask your questions at any time throughout the conversations. And these sessions are meant to add value to you and provide you clarification on different topics in project controls. So, please feel free to engage in the conversation, ask your questions, and get guidance from our fantastic guest speaker today. And about today's guest speaker, you are really here up for a great treat, because our guest speaker brings profound knowledge and insights and experience in the area of both contracts management and project controls. Currently, he is the manager of contract oversight and conformance, a department manager at BC Hydro, but previously he has been project control manager. So he has been on both sides, and that's why he brings a lot of profound insights into the topic. So without any further ado, please help me give a big, warm virtual welcome to Ali Yahosseini, for joining us today. Please help me welcome Ali to this virtual stage, everyone. Ali, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Very glad to have you in this virtual platform, sharing your knowledge and expertise with our global audience. Before we get started, again, I didn't have a chance to properly introduce you. Tell us about yourself, how you got started in project controls, your background, how you got started in project controls, and now how you end up in contracts management. Give us more insights about your experience and your expertise.
Thank you very much, Oret. Thanks for the introduction. And yes, so this is definitely an interesting topic also for me to talk about. Today, I think we're going to have a lot to cover, so I'm trying to make sure I come up with a really brief introduction of my background. I think what I started after my bachelor of industrial engineering. I jumped into the industry and as a scheduler those days, 20 plus years ago, was the right place to go for us. And then I have been in different kind of roles in scheduling, team lead, then planner, and then cost controller, capital cost controller, and then gradually getting into the claims about 15 years ago in oil and gas. And that's where we ended up jumping to the contractor side and understanding contract clauses and practices and change orders and substantiations and stuff like that. So then I was sort of pulled into those conversations, and I was also keen to read the contract, understand clauses, and see how we have integrated all different disciplines there in the contract. Expectation was that, but then I realized that no, probably is not the case, and so the integration is not always the case between project controls and contract management and so on. So then I switched to the claim and contract management and supply chain, and when it comes to pre-award and post-award, so I had different roles on that. And in the last 6-7 years of my experience, I've been involved mostly on contract management, both pre-award and post-award, but mostly post-award.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali, for sharing your insights with the audience and sharing a bit of your experience with us. Sorry, it seems that I'm just not sharing just give me a second here. Um, what I'm doing wrong here, I don't know. But it seems that one speaker at a time shows. But thank you so much for really sharing your feedback and background. It's really amazing to see how you got started from project controls and now landing in construction management. Before I go to the questions, I just want to quickly acknowledge some of our audience who are showing up here, if you don't mind. I see Marcel is here joining us from Netherlands. Thank you so much, Marcel, always in our LinkedIn live sessions and very active member of our community. Thank you so much, Marcel. We see Pedro. Very glad to see you, Pedro, again. Thank you so much for joining today's session. We have Fabio from London joining us. We also have Karen joining us from Paris. Very glad to have you, Karen, here. We also have Siri joining us from Canada, Ontario. That's great. We also have Ashish joining us from Oman, and I hope I can catch up with all the names. We also have Alberto joining us from Venezuela. Welcome, Alberto. We have Carlos joining us from Puerto Rico. And who else is here? We have from Morocco, we have John joining us from Denmark. Glad to see you again, John. And yeah, that's amazing. So thank you everyone for joining us here again. If you haven't yet introduced yourself, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. It's always exciting to see people from all over the globe joining us here and really interested in learning. So a big shout out to everyone who is joining us live to learn something really profound from today's session. So thank you again, everyone who is joining us today. Now, going back to the discussion and applying contracts management into applying project controls into contracts management, I have some questions from Ali, and I would love to get into that. So Ali, as you've been both on both part of this roles, both as a project controls as well as the contract management, how have you seen project control principles really influence decision making in contracts management? I know you are mainly from the construction industry, but really how it helps with the decision making process in the construction management. If you can shed more light, then we can go into more details about the integration between contracts management and project controls. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, Shara. So to talk about principles of controls and how we define project controls and what are the boundaries that we define within the project controls knowledge area, I think I should start with a platform, with a framework that we can use in this session today. And I have been always using this platform in the past. So I'm going to reference the AACEi, TCM, total cost management framework that we have been using for a long period of time, and it's still there and it gets updated every time. And this is a good start when we're going to talk about project controls principles and how that would influence the decision making. What is this TCM? It's actually an integrated approach to program portfolio and project management in a kind of an integrated and systematic approach. Means that all different knowledge areas are dovetailing to each other and covering each other. So we are today talking about project controls and also talking about contract management, and there are two areas, and I'll add more like risk and others. I try to add more in this conversation today. So we have in TCM we have a knowledge area or practice is called procurement planning, and this is meant to be planning and not execution. So that's all about decision making upfront. So it's all about having our decision already made prior to awarding the contract, because it could be too late and you might face a lot of issues. What are these decisions that you would like to make are the topics of today's conversation. So decision making about work breakdown structure, it's coming from project controls, but decision about contract breakdown structure is coming from contract management team. So do they sit down together ahead of the project when they are really in the early phases of planning of the project? And do they sit down and make sure that the WBSs that they have created, the work breakdown structure that they have created, and the contract breakdown structures are dovetailing to each other? There are certain tools that we can use, but mostly what I have seen is the scope development is key, really important, and how we deal with actually the risk upfront is really important. So there are certain risks that we don't want to take as an owner, and I'm going to talk about different situations if we are owner companies, or we are an EPCM company, or we are a general contractor, and then trade contracts are down there. So I'll try mostly to talk about the owners' positions and EPCM positions, so on, when we get to this type of conversation. But risk is the most important side of it right up front, and this is all about the project control. So how do you want to mitigate your risk? How do you want to transfer your risk? And when it comes to contract breakdown structure and managing your contract, what type of contract do you want to have? And it's all about who you are as an owner. So it's all about capacity and capability of the owners. So they should actually know themselves very well before going out to the market. What is my core competence? If I think engineering is my core competence, then what are the characteristics of this performance that I expect myself, like my company, to have? And then what I'm going to award down the road, what I'm going to outsource down the road. And so we might have different type of contracts: lump sum contract, time and material contract, unit price, cost, whatever we call it. It's all about the risk we're going to take and the risk we're going to transfer. This is key, and this should happen up front, and this should be discussed very well up front. So there are different scenarios, for example, on unit price contracts type, or or anything. So reimbursable one, when it comes to the scope management, is usually when the scope is less well developed, so or a new technology is involved. So you go as an owner as with a better project controls capability, you go out with this type of contract, and so you see that how your control capabilities is involved in how you define or you pick the contract type in your sector. So lump sum contracts are generally used when the scope is well developed and advanced, and the design changes are unlikely. So I've seen a lot of those lump sum contracts that are out there, but doesn't match with the definition I provided today. And then usually on those areas, owners doesn't want to have a lot of control or doesn't have the control capability in house. So would the owner would try to pass it down, and when it comes to risk and everything else. And but reimbursables are different. So it's all about how you define your role as an owner, how well you know yourself as an owner, and what is your core competence. And it's really important so for owners to know their core competence. Unfortunately, like 70% of the time is not the case, and they don't know what is their core competences. They just come up with like different type of contracts, and they award different type, and some of them they are not able to control, and that's where they would start losing. And so what I would try to maybe wrap up on this question on decision making process is how to apply project controls principles in decision making is have your the first like levels of WBS ready upfront, and make sure you also add the first levels of your contract breakdown structure ready really upfront. Really define the chart of accounts, and like at what level you're going to really manage the cost, and then at what level you're going to contract it down. Make sure the level of detail you expect to get to that chart of accounts when you roll up your cost through invoicing, through accrual process, or anything from your contractor is well defined in your contract. So it should be stipulated in your contract. When you award it, it's going to be very difficult to ask contractors to give you certain level of details on what you need to roll up the information to your packages and so on. And stuff like this. So I think owners um, they should establish those contract requirements regarding WBSs, and then payment method, invoicing procedure, change order procedure, and stuff like that upfront. And there's a tool that we have been always using, and I used it, I would say, since 15 years ago till now. It's been one of the tools that I really enjoy using, and it's the contract quilt that I would call it contract quilt. So it's how you connect your WBSS to your contract breakdown structure, and you would define which contractor would do which part of the work, and then you would come up with this quilt of different contractors tackling different side of your WBS. And I'll talk about that. I would elaborate more about this tool and the benefit of this tool. But this is one of the best planning tool when it comes to integration of project controls and contract management practices.
Wow, that was really interesting. And I think that's often ignored, Ali, right? To bring those expectations from the contractor when it comes to the WBS roll-up reporting, as you said, change management, risk management into the contract. So to walk us through, because I know you have done a great job integrating project control principles into the contract. Can you walk us through the step-by-step process on how you make sure you have this best practice and project control principles already applied in your contract? Like when you're reviewing a contract, what is a bad contract, what is a good contract, what elements we need to make sure we have in our contract that really helps managing the projects well. So can you just shed more light on the integration part between project controls and contracts? You also brought up a very good point about the contracts work breakdown structure versus the WBS and how you're aligning those. In addition to those, like what other areas you see the integration, and what you recommend us to reflect into the contract?
A very good question, Shora. I can come up with some examples, I would say, for this question, and I would touch the different areas. Maybe I tried not to miss all areas because it's really a package that we need to discuss, and I would always refer and make reference to ACE practices and knowledge areas that we have, and make sure that none of those knowledge areas are missed when we're going to try and incorporate things. But I talk about risk management already, and I think risk register is a really important tool that we really need to start working on it upfront in planning phases. And so when you start establishing your risk, there are certain risks that are related to your contracts and the scope and time and cost and stuff like that. So you really need to make sure that those risk register items are dovetail to your contract management conversations, and then all rolled down and addressed down there to your contract clauses. So you really need to make sure that your contract quilt, your contracting strategy, the overall strategy, your risk register, they are all your WBS, your construction strategy, your basically overall project strategy are all dovetailing to each other and is well communicated to all parties. Like legal is involved right up front about the risk that you are defining. So the way you would define the risk is totally different the way they would define it, or they would translate it, or they would interpret it. So it's really important to engage them all in this process, have meetings with the stakeholders in the project, internal and external. Really key to engage contractors. There might be your contractor, there may not be your contractor down the road, because you might go through the bidding process and you may not end up with those. But it's good to engage really a strong contractor upfront in developing your strategies, and then they would help you on that. So for sure, this is the kind of a partnership that we are looking for. But I'm going to jump into a couple of examples. These are the soft aspects that we really need to make sure that is in place. This is the spirit that we need to have. But there are also tools, techniques that we need to have. And I think cost estimating techniques is really important. So you really need to make sure that whatever is your cost estimating techniques internally. So I know that majority of companies in North America I've seen are using ACE estimating practices level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so if you really want or expect your contractor to follow the same, so you need to establish the same thing in the contract. You need to reference it in the contract, and then it would be easy if you're going to use any metrics that is involved in the in your areas. Like let's say it's in British Columbia, if there's any particular laws or regulation, anything, or at national level in Canada, for example, or in US, so you need to reference them in your contract. The other part that I would address would be the progress measurement system. So this is another challenge that we always face when we're dealing with the contract, and I would say a poor contract would be the contract that doesn't address the progress measurement system. And it's again back to the principles of control. So how are you going to control how much you're going to have control, and then to what level you're going to control. And as soon as you figure it out as an owner, as an EPCM company, then you need to exactly stipulate it in the contract what you expect from your contractor in reporting the measurement there, the progress measurement and so on. So this is really important. So it's better to have it upfront than amending it down there, because negotiation is very difficult. So down the road, and example would be, let's say, piping. So you want to have piping as a part of the scope of the work. So how do you want to measure it? So pipe laying is one thing. Then you're gonna fill it up, and then welding and NDT tests and all the stuff like that, and documentation at the end and so on. How do you want to go with percentages? How do you want to make sure that they provide the percentages that you expect? So do you want to give 20% to pipe laying? Is this what should be there and for the payment as well, or it's a different story? Because in your contract maybe it says piping general, so you need to break it down in the progress measurement system. Do you have this in your contract or not? If you don't, make sure you have it up front, that you don't go after the contract award on these subjects. It's very difficult to deal with it. That would create confusion and claims down the road. Contract change order validation is the big part of it. It's another subject I'm going to add. And again, I'm going to reference one of the ACE recommended practices. It's all about demonstrating entitlement for contract change orders or claim that you might receive. And, um, and it's all about the steps you need to go through it to demonstrate the entitlement for any change order or claim. So this is another area I would say we need to make sure that we establish it upfront. This could be an internal document, not necessarily something that would go to the contract, but you really need to have that upfront. You really need to provide enough training to all parties. And when it comes to change order, it's not just contract management. So it's actually contract management is probably the last department, the first and last department sort of to be involved, but not the most important department. So as estimating department would be engaged. It's quantity surveyors, engineers, legal department, and all different departments are coming together. So to make sure down the road, because and I'm talking about super large contracts, a couple of $1 billion civil work with lots of change orders in place and so on. So you really need to have an established practice, for example, ahead of the time, and to better control the situation when you get a change order and so on. Because this is after the fact. So you have done all your risk analysis and you have transfer and everything, but now you're on the actual job and you get all those interfaces issues and problems down the road and scope changes and so on. So how do you go with validating change orders? It's the big part of contract management. You really need to have some control over it. You need to have a practice. It's not about I'm an expert in contract management, so I know how to deal with different departments. Not experience based necessarily. You really need to make sure you don't miss areas like um, causal event occurrence, like how to demonstrate that the event did indeed happen, and then also would be also conversation about adhering to the contract change requirement, and if the contractor is adhering, it is reflected in the contract, but it should be in your internal document as well. And also contractual entitlement. How do you figure it out? Do you want to involve legal, and how do you involve them? And let's say the mitigation impact that should be in place by your contractor, and then quantification of the impact that should happen with regards to the claim and stuff like this. So there are different things that we can discuss and bring it to the process, but I would say these two are really key when it comes to challenges, examples, and how we do dovetailing, risk management, controlled change controls and stuff into the contract management practices. And basically, it's very difficult to divide them. It's very difficult to say I'm talking about contract management or I'm talking about risk management. They're really dovetailed to each other. They're really integrated.
Wow, that's amazing. Imagine having all these contracts, having all these great elements on how you're going to, as you mentioned, how the cost estimating is going to work, the levels and the level of reporting, how about the progress and performance measurement, how the contractor, I mean, the expectation of the owner from the contractor. You also mentioned about the solid change management process to be reflected in the contract and also the validation part, how it's working. So it's a lot of, and risk mitigation and risk management, how it's working, and it should be reflected in the contract. They're all great topics that you mentioned, Ali, that needs to be reflected in the contract. And just the question on the level of the details that you go into the contract, because you brought up an example on the piping, and I assume that was an example that contractor goes to the detail for progress measurement for piping, for example, but you just ask the contractors in the contract, this is what we expect as an owner in the contract, right? So you don't go through that much level of detail in the contract. Is that right?
Exactly, and this is really important. This is really important. This is where majority of the owners would fail, and when it comes to controlling the work, no matter the scope or changes or detail or whatever. So this is back to my core competence as an owner, to what level I'm going to control, and to what level I shouldn't care, and I should define it with the type of contract that I go out. So the type of contract is really important to show to what level I care, to what level I don't care. So if you go time and material, you are going really to the detail. You
Yeah.
need to have a hell of a people, like let's say number of construction officers, construction managers, quantity surveyors, all in-house to make sure that what is being reported through daily field report by your contractor is correct. So you're going to check, and so it's too much of checks and balances, and sometimes it's difficult, impossible to control, and then that's where owner would drop,
Mm.
and that's the contractor to invoice and start going over the contract, or not to exceed value in time and material contracts and change orders. So it's actually really important to not to get into that trap, and it's
Okay.
actually an art. So it's more than a practice, but having a good tool in place would help us a lot. Knowledge of project controls would help us. Experience and knowledge of project controls is really important. Those who have seen those like impacted companies by losing the control, or I would say having loose control in place, is really important. Where we should close our eyes is really important. We should have areas that we should make sure our eyes are closed, and we're just going to see at certain level, and this is contractor responsibility. But have we defined that responsibility in the contract? That's a different story. Is
Exactly.
this a design build contract, or is just the construction contract, and I'm owning the design? Again, I'm pulling the control to my side in the scope changes, and this is another trap again if I'm not a good engineering company as an owner as well. So if engineering is not my core competence, so again I would fail. Although I stipulated everything in the contract, I didn't recognize my capabilities and capacities.
Yeah, well said, Ali. Thank you very much. So you also brought up a very good point that that's a joint effort to come up with that contract, right? A lot of disciplines are involved, from cost estimating to legal to a lot of disciplines. Do you also involve project controls in there? I know because you've been in project controls, you have that knowledge, but I don't think every contractor manager knows that stuff in project control. So for those companies that don't have that knowledgeable person like yourself who have been on that on both sides, what is your recommendation in the process of involving project controls into the contract management? At what point and how you get their involvement into the process?
It's actually really important. No matter the person who's dealing with the contract got some project controls background or not, definitely project controls should get involved really upfront,
Okay.
early stages of the project planning. I'm not talking about execution at all, just planning. And I've seen that we don't plan. So we don't have time to plan because majority of mega projects are driven by market or by policies. governmental policies or any other provincial policies and so on. So, but assuming that we have time to plan and then we that even short period of time, we definitely should involve project controls upfront. And project controls is not just schedulers or planners. So we really need to have key persons involved who have been in project controls areas enough to understand what we discussed today, and then make sure that these principles are reflected in the contract. If it's a price list, that we need to make sure how this price list is going to come to the project controls, how the invoicing system, how the accrual system, all this stuff are going to roll up when we actually get into the execution of the contract. The system that we have in place, project controls are really good in building the systems for that. It's not just about the practice, it's also the system to handle that. So the level of control, the complexity that you want, and the software that you're going to use is a different story. So this is also project control's role. I know IT is involved, but they have used those tools in the past, like I would say in many years, not necessarily past 20 years. And so they know ups and downs of it. So they are all, like everyone is in love with Excel, for example. But how about integrating these softwares? How about making sure that your Primavera P6 is talking to your actual costs in SAP? Do you have a bridge between SAP and P6? These are basically technical conversation, could be IT related, but project controls are so good at integrating also these boundaries together and interfaces and make sure that nothing is missed, because as soon as you start getting those invoices and actuals are coming, you would notice that, oh my goodness, like all actuals are going somewhere that I didn't have enough budget for that, because my work breakdown structure is not necessarily matching my contract breakdown structure. So actuals are going somewhere that I don't want it. So if you're going to go, for example, and mostly owners are going to go asset based, because they're going to asset detail the whole project down the road and start amortizing it. So the cost of the asset is really important at the end of the project. So you don't want to do a lot of work on asset actual cost down the road. So you really need to make sure that your WBS is actually asset based, and then all the contracts are sort of asset based. It's not easy. It's not easy at all, but we can always do a really good job in doing our best to match it as much as possible, and make sure that down the road we don't do a lot of rework on defining the actual cost of each asset, because it's key for owners to make sure they amortize it over the life of the equipment, or that particular asset could be dam, could be hydropower plant, could be generator, could be desalination unit, or could be anything in oil and gas or stuff. But these are important.
And Ali, do you also reflect the same big requirements that you just mentioned into the project charter as well, or you prefer to have everything just in the contract and expect the contractor to understand and know how to report back to the owner?
Absolutely. So reporting is definitely important, and we should have a really well-established reporting structure upfront. And I would add it under the communication and knowledge area, and making sure that the communication between contractor and the owner, or EPCM owner, or whatever setup you have down there, this is a smooth communication and well established upfront. There are a bunch of different examples that I can provide, but on defining that. But reporting wise, absolutely important. I tried to touch on the first question, but I would elaborate a little bit more on that all different reports that you get could be monthly report, weekly report, bi-weekly report, and it sometimes is too much that we put in the contract I have
Yeah,
seen,
exactly.
and none of them are valuable. At the end of the day, none of them are rolling up to the level that you want, to the breakdown that you want, and this is happening. Why? Because you didn't involve project controls upfront, because you didn't recognize their need, you didn't establish it in the contract. So it should be established upfront in the contract. They should get involved upfront to take a look at your pricing list. It's also important. If I'm going to go unit price, for example, they really need to see that, and they would come up with lots of good advices to you that how it would be better to roll out. And because if I'm going to roll up this price list to certain assets, because it might be the price list of piping separate from rotor equipment, separate from fixed equipment, separate from civil, foundation, structure, and stuff like that. But the way they have it in the WBS is asset based. So it's a different story. So they really need to get involved on the reporting side of it, on the structure of the contract, and then make sure that when we get to the execution, all the information are rolling up. Information could be cost, schedule, milestones, even like I didn't touch on the schedule a lot today, but milestones are also important. Level of control, to what level of milestone I really would like to get involved as an owner, and to what extent I'm going to pass it to the contractor and don't care. I don't really care unless I need to be witnessed, or I need to witness actually those. So they need someone to witness the according to the contract. So I might define some witness point, but not really getting into too much of hassle on detail of schedules or work cost and stuff like that.
Wow, so you basically cover all these essential elements of control in the contract, from the schedule to the reporting. So everything is you recommend we need to incorporate into our contract and involve project controls upfront, uh, from the planning stage to the time that we put together the contract. So that's really amazing. How about some challenges, Ali? Because I assume not everyone is following these best practices, and definitely our contracts are not that comprehensive. So, what challenges have you faced in incorporating these project controls principles into the contract? And what was the reaction of the contractors in dealing with a lot of demands from the owner to comply with? So, if you can shed more light on the challenges, I appreciate it.
So for sure, I was trying to address different type of challenges, to come up with some major challenges that are involved. So one of them is probably the contractual ambiguity that is in place, and this is all about terms and conditions. And again, back to who I am, and if I know myself and what I really want from my contractor. And the other side is the scope changes. So some of the scope changes are the result of the decision I have made upfront, and I should acknowledge that as an owner, and I should make sure that I don't repeat it again. And I'm going to talk about those challenges because it's more relevant to the subject of our conversation today. Also, contractual ambiguity is a different story. Those loopholes that we create in drawings and so on are the major part of it, and owners are so good at this and giving the opportunity to contractor to claim down the road. And contractors also so good at, and I was used to be a part of a contractor team to prior to the bid or during the bid process to make sure that we identify those loopholes for future income and parked it somewhere in our confidential documents in house to make sure as soon as the execution is started. So we go through those loopholes and we bring them up, and we show owner that they missed this and that, and here's this claim, here's that claim. So these are the major challenges. But how are these challenges are mitigated upfront? And some of them, and if we miss that, and it's now a challenge how to support that. So I would say, if I'm going to categorize it, principles of control is one thing that we really need to make sure that the level of control that we want is in place, and as an owner or as a contractor. I'm going to come up with an example and give you two projects that have been involved, both of them mega and over $1 billion each, and both oil and gas, and actually both part of one program. So we did the first part, and then we did the second part, and we learned a lot on doing the first part. So on the first part, owner didn't recognize that the capacity of itself, and they didn't have any analysis on that. So what they did, a quick example, they went to the market and they said, we want to contract out discipline wise. So for this area of the work, I'm going to give civil to one contractor. I'm going to give a structure to another contractor. I'm going to give piping to the other one. And then electrical panels and cabling and cable trays and everything to other contractors and so on. So bunch of contractors. So what would happen in such situation? And if you plan your project this way, so you would create a lot of interfaces between contractors. And this is another key principle there for us when we're going to develop or plan for a project. So you don't create a lot of interface because that would be an area to start getting more claims, and this is not a good approach at all in any project, and this is definitely a place that you would fail as an owner. So what happened? We got lots of claims. To deal with those claims, you really need to have a very strong control team in place. Could be contract control, contract management, project controls, surveyors, construction officers. Now, uh, do we have that many people? No, this is not something that owners have. So uh, owners would fail, and then contractors that would go to the benefit of the contractor. And so that was a huge lesson learned. So going back to the next phase of the program, which was another large gas refinery project. We suggested going, and that was Project Contours to come up with this idea. Project Contours wasn't involved on the first one. So come up with, instead of going discipline wise, give one area to one contractor and just let them do everything on that area. And that was a really wise decision at the end. And the concern from owner side was that, oh, I'm not sure if the contractor got all the capabilities of dealing with this. And so we're able to support them with some examples of contractors who are so good in civil and structure, also so good in contracting out the rest of it. So they don't need to have the core competence of electrical work or piping and stuff, but they are so good in hiring thousands of pipe fitters, because it's massive. We are not talking about two, three welders here and there. So, and that was the solution. So then we saved easily hundreds of millions of dollars easily on just claim side of it. And so this is one thing. The other side that is really a big challenge is collaboration. So how do you collaborate with your contractor? How do you define it? It's all about the way you communicate, the communication plan that you have in place, the scorecard that you put in place to measure the success in your project and stuff like that. But also the spirit of collaboration is really important. How you start your meeting, your communication, and your the way you deal with your contractor down the road, pre-award, also post-award, and the respect that should be in place, the support that should be in place as an owner or as an EPCM company or whatever. So these are, I would say, the major challenges that I have seen mostly in contract management and of mega projects that I have been involved in the past.
Wow, that was really good. So, just to wrap it up for those who didn't catch the whole thing, and correct me if I'm wrong based on what you said, Ali. So, I think the first challenge that you mentioned was the principles of control that is often not reflected in the contract, which is very important. And that's what we are talking about, how we're controlling the project to be reflected in the contract. I think the second challenge that you mentioned was having so many contractors working kind of a lot of interfaces among the contractors. So we have to be very careful on our contracting strategy and to minimize the risks and the claims. And finally, you mentioned the challenge of the collaboration and communication among your contractors. So these were the three main ones that you mentioned, right? Did I miss anything, Ali?
Absolutely, no, you covered it very well.
Very good. So then, so the first one, the first challenge you mentioned, yeah, by incorporating project controls early on, hopefully that would be resolved. And interface, you brought a very good example of reducing those interfaces. But how about the collaboration? Because always collaboration, I assume even at this huge program level with a lot of contractors and subcontractors, would be really a challenge. Like inside the project, collaboration and communication is always a challenge. So how do you overcome this collaboration challenge among different contractors? Yeah, you mentioned some important things about scorecards and communication plan and other things, but how do you overcome these challenges, if you don't mind sharing?
Absolutely. So there are two aspects to this question. So a part of it is linked to planning, and the part of it is linked to execution of the contract. On planning side, when you're going to define your risk, and then how you're going to transfer your risk and stuff like that. So uh, you really need to understand what type of relationship you're going to build with your future contract or vendor, whatever we're going to call it, supplier of service and everything. Is this a partnership that you would like to establish down the road based on the risk that you see and you know that you are not going to manage this risk alone, so you're really going to have a partner to manage the risk? Or is this a kind of an arm length relationship that you are establishing through this contract? You're actually just going to contract out and transfer as much as possible all the rest down there, and stop. So what type of relationship you're going to do? This should happen on planning phase of the contract, pre-award, and even planning of the project, because it's beyond just the contract and so on. So if it's partnership, so you know already your partner, so you plan it very well, you engage them on every single stages of establishing the project documents and project plans and contract management plan and contracting strategy and everything. They would be your ally, and they would support you all the way down the road. And if it's not the case and you decided to go and award let's say a single alone contract, construction contract, then how do you make sure that the collaboration is in place? It's all about the way you start your communication with them, the kickoff meeting, how you develop a really as a good line of communication, and and the agenda that you provide in the kickoff meeting right off the bat. This is beyond your contract. In kickoff meeting, usually you establish some part of your agendas related to the contract requirements. So this is in the contract just to reinforce it. But also you have to focus a lot on on collaboration side of it. If safety is really a big deal for you, you really need to focus on that. If you're going to have certain level of collaboration between your team at site, for example, because it's mostly happening at site, also in offices, but that's where you really need to have a good plan. If you're going to have team buildings, you definitely engage your contractor always on that. You're going to have a very well established team building opportunities for both teams, because there are going to be a lot of tensions down there, and you really need to make sure that people also have time to park the work outside of the environment and go to a different atmosphere and talk to each other and play with each other, play together, and so on. So I'm going to add a very, I would say, one of the most important subject that is in my mind right now here. We can talk about collaboration, and there are articles in the webs if you go, so there are too many, and collaborating contracting is right now a big deal, and everyone is talking about that, and it's trending, and how to have that collaborating contracting upfront. It's all about different type of partnership, but when it comes to execution of the contract, I think inclusion and diversity is the most important thing these days. We are getting workforces from all over the world with different background and different kind of level of communication and way of communication and so on. So it's really important to have engagement from all parties during the contract execution. In those meetings, you really have to have some ground rules in place, if it's a weekly meeting or anything, to make sure that there's a respectful environment in place between contractors and owners, and they are all treated the same. So you really need to have a body to to monitor this and make sure that everyone is included and the team that is fully diversified these days. This is inevitable, so it's everywhere. So you can see that it's definitely diverse. Everyone is included on that, and then I would say these ground rules are really important, and you really need to have a lot of training for stakeholders, for senior managers to reinforce it. This should come from top to the bottom of the organization or the project structure, no matter you are on the contractor side or on an owner side. We can talk about collaboration a lot. We can definitely talk about it a lot, but I think the key to that is how to include everyone, including contractor, how to get some feedback from them upfront. I've seen that this is the lesson learned the hard way, I would say, that if we don't engage the contractor in our conversation, we think it's confidential. That one is confidential. That one should happen in-house. That one should happen. So I know this was supposed to be an arm's length relationship. Engage them in issues that you have and define incentive for that. If you haven't defined it in your contract, and your contract I've seen is mostly not incentivized, is mostly related to the penalties that are going to happen to the contractor side and so on. No, turn your contract. Collaborative approach is turning your contract from penalty oriented contract to the incentive oriented contract. Incentivize them, and down the road in your wording, incentivize them, include them.
Wow, great. So many great strategies you shared for effective communication in your contracts, contract management practices, and collaboration. And I also like the fact that you brought about collaborative contracting and new things that everyone is talking about. And good news for those who are interested in exploring this further. We're going to have just one LinkedIn live session on this topic, collaborative contracting with Hedgie. I know you know him, Ali. So we're going to have that. It's one of the areas he's really found interest, and he's going to open that for the audience. So we don't get into further details on it because we will have a dedicated session on that topic alone. But before I move on, I have one more question to ask from you, Ali. I haven't seen questions from the audience, so I think they are so much into the content. Or if you have any question, please bring them in, because again, these sessions are meant to be designed for you. So if you have any question, we still have some time to ask your questions. So please type in your questions so I ask Ali any question you have related to contracts management and integration with project controls. So another question that I'm interested, you covered a lot of great strategies and best practices, Ali, in regards to the contracts and how to incorporate planning principles and involving project controls principles into the contract, and how important it is as an owner to have all of these details in our contract. So how about the contract KPIs? How do we make sure that we are doing things right? Is there any key performance indicators to measure the effectiveness of the contract management? Or is there anything like project controls? We have KPIs for everything. How about in contracts management? Is there any KPI that you can refer us to or tell us more about?
Excellent. No, very, very good question. On the KPI side of it, I would say it's actually really tricky what you put there, and I'm going to get back to the organization and operation strategy in companies, in owners, in corporates, big corporates, and so on. And I'm gonna share something that I learned many years ago, 20 plus years ago, when I was studying my master degree in Sweden, in Chalmers University, and there was a course about operational strategy. That was basically the subject of the master degree, and how you cascade your strategies at the mission and vision and strategy down there to your organization when you have a very large organization. And there was a methodology, different methodologies, but one of them was balanced scorecard. So to make sure that there's a balance in what you cascade down, and make sure it's actually rolled up back with good feedbacks, and this process back and forth is happening always. And this is very similar in contract management as well. So if you're going to put any KPIs, it's really important to make sure it's a balanced KPI. You are not deviating from your project strategies by putting any certain KPI. So sometimes KPIs are looking really attractive, but as soon as you add it, that would impact your relationship with your contractor. That would impact the way you're going to manage the contract. Some KPIs might be challenging, but I think this should be really controlled very well upfront, discussed very well what type of KPIs I'm going to have. If you look up different articles on KPIs related to contract management, some of them are, I would say, contract efficiency KPIs, some of them are contract efficacy KPIs, and some are contract risk. And I have seen KPIs that are covering a couple of these, like these three categories. Usually, it's there, and I've seen that they are there and in different articles and so on. But what I have put together as a KPI, mostly I would say in the contract and or within the contract management team, is um, it could be from pre-award or the post-award, and it depends what type of contract you're managing. If for example, you have, and I don't want to talk about cost KPIs, schedule KPIs, and they're all there. You can always add it to the contract, and we already talked about level of control, so we don't want to miss that and so on. So we already covered those. End value, I know it's a big deal. I know, Shore, you have worked on that a lot in the past, and you have lots of training in your website. I say as many of them, definitely all of them, many of them I go there very applied, and so I don't want to cover that. I know that's a separate conversation, but and when it comes to getting a report from contractor, making sure the end value is calculated correctly, that's a huge deal and a conversation. So we can park it for now and for a different session. But other KPIs that I think would be helpful within the contract management team is a variance in not to exceed value of the time and material contract. And then in any change orders, you might have some change orders of time and material down the road with your contractor, and there's always a not to exceed value on that to control the total value. And so you might have bunch of those change orders of this type. So you really need to have a metrics there to control and see how much you are deviating from. That would provide a good feedback to your team or to your executive to show that you didn't pick a right contract maybe because your the variance is huge, for example. So this is a good metrics internally to have. And the change order throughput time is another metric that I always make sure that I have tools to calculate it. So from the time that the change is initiated, no matter is owner initiated or a contractor initiated change, and then and the time that you settle and execute the change order. So execute means sign off, fully sign off change order. So this is really important, and just to check and see where this change order is going and how many departments are involved and so on. This throughput time is really important. This is really impacting the time of the projects and creating hassles and creating future disputes and claims if we don't monitor. So this is really important. And I would say we didn't talk about contract mediation or contract any way of dealing with the dispute. We didn't cover in this conversation. We can have some metrics over there from the time you start going to the dispute to the end of it, and this would give us a lot of good information to the decision makers on future decisions they're going to make to say, first, if I'm going to settle with this type of contractors, I won't go that way of settlement, I'll go this way. I won't go to arbitration because looks like I'm not good at in dealing with arbitration. These are good metrics. So if you have number of change orders that have gone through arbitration, how many of them failed, how many of them didn't, and so on, that would show again to the owner what is the owner's capability, capacity, and core competence. I think these metrics should all talk to each other, should roll up to the contracting strategy, should roll up to their project strategy and project charter, and what you really wanted at the end of this project, no matter what type of project you are dealing with.
Great metrics. So, wow, you're tough on your contractors, Ali. Measuring everything. That's amazing. So, you are requesting the contractor to submit those KPIs, or you as an owner measure the performance of your contractors based on those KPIs?
Good question. Some of them should be shared for sure. So because you're going to evaluate, so they need to know how the information is collected, and they are a part of a collection. So they need to be involved. That should be in their contract. And some of them are internal. Actually, that's going to give us some lesson learned down the road. Or and it should be really proactively measured. So then you don't wait until the project is over to learn something, because at the, like as soon as you get the first change order and you learn it, there should be a really good learning process for the individuals at project level, also executives up there, to know maybe if I'm weak at scope management, then I don't go arbitration on a technical matter like a scope and so on. If I'm weak on legal side, probably I won't go that path. I would try to mitigate the risk by involving contractor and incentivize them, and then settle differently. How should I say, settling is the, so it's not about entitlement necessarily. So if I see a merit, I would deal with that. So I would take care of the merit instead of entitlement. Although I know that there's not enough of entitlement for the contractor there, if I see a merit, I might deal with that. I might come up with an omnibus approach in dealing with the claims instead of just individual claims. This way, I will manage their entitlement, my entitlement, their merit, and all my merit, and all other legal entitlement and contractual entitlement together in an omnibus approach instead of one single claim process. That is
Great.
really difficult to manage.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, we didn't get too much into claims and dispute, and that's where the contract really speaks very loudly. So that's why these tips and strategies that you've shared really help on that side as well. So thank you very much. Wow, what a great session it was. We already went 5 minutes over time. If you don't mind, I just see some questions coming in. Is that okay, Ali, if we go just for 5 more minutes covering some
Absolutely.
questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we have a question on if you remember one of the challenges that we talked about, Ali, was that so many interfaces between contractors. And that was an example you brought that you changed the strategy for the second part of the project and reducing those interfaces and by contracting the whole thing to one area to a contractor. So now the question is kind of they want to know more about the interface related challenges that you discussed from an owner's perspective, because again, I don't see the name, but he's asking, he has worked on the general contractor side, and working on different interfaces always used to be a challenge. So what are your recommendations, Ali, when we are facing that situation? Yeah, you kind of corrected that in that example that you brought for the second phase, but you're in the middle of it and you're now having a lot of interfaces. How you can resolve this challenge of too many interfaces among the contractors from an owner's perspective?
For sure. So from owner's perspective, so if I've made the mistake of having a lot of
Mhm.
interfaces already and I'm facing it right now,
Yeah.
so I need to staff up. So I need to staff up, have enough people at site, on the job, boots on the ground, daily meeting with contractor to deal with interfaces. There's no way other than that. So we really need to tackle them every day. You need to have representative from engineering who can speak, who can make a decision down there. Someone from construction team, and few people, executive, if they need to be called on that day to make a final decision. That's the only way, because now there are going to be lots of challenges per day. And so you're going to have daily meeting. It's beyond that tailboard meeting with all contractors for certain issues that are facing basically more than 2 or 3 contractors. So the owner should be there, representative of owner there, all representative of contractors there, and whoever can make a decision. And then you deal with rotation in the schedule of people down there. So some of them are 14/7, some of them are 5/2, some of them are 10/4, And so you need to make sure that you have planned it well, that there are always a decision maker down there to deal with the issues. And bring the technology also in place. So what are one of the way that we have been doing to manage the interfaces between disciplines is clash detection and using software to make sure that clashes are predicted and prevented and covered. But majority of the work I have seen, you will end up seeing some clashes. So maybe you have covered 80%, but 20% is there. And this is again back to the interfaces. So if you have one contractor covering all interfaces, they would deal with the clashes by themselves. If you have multiple, they're gonna, question each other and then transfer the risk to someone else. So then you need to have the collaboration down there, those meetings that I mentioned with decision makers there, and really healthy environment to make a decision, not to try um, um, to question others, or could be contractor or owner. That is the spirit of it. Otherwise, we would fail. And then the rest is how to manage those meetings and so on. Coordination could be not just related to the interfaces, but let's say in a confined area, in a powerhouse, which is, let's say, underground powerhouse. So you have different type of cranes there to support the installation of the equipment, and there are different contractors using two cranes. So you need to coordinate that. That's another piece that comes to this type of interfaces and coordination. So you really need to have established mechanism down there and the team there to deal with that and coordinate it there. And trust is a big deal, and coordination is a big deal, and collaboration is a big deal. So it's the tool that we can provide for sure, technology, so everyone can look at the 3D model, could be 4D model in your kickoff meeting that I have used, and it was really helpful to show them what are the issues I see down the road before they get started with mobilization. So they know how to mobilize though. So I'm going to say this scope is not going to be, this front is not going to be available to you, no matter who is going to be the other contractor dealing with that, because other contractors still late, and they know, so they won't bring their crane there though. They won't bring other equipment there though. And this is mitigated. So it's all about engagement. So if it's going to happen, it's happened. And if we are there, so we just need to coordinate it. Make sure you funnel enough money to staffing up your team to make sure you have the decision makers down there to quickly tackle that. And you pay for that because you didn't plan it. But this is 1-10-100 rule. So now you're at the execution, you're paying 100 instead of $1 in planning side.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Ali. We have also, okay, that's a comment or question here. Ahmed is saying, oh, thanking you for this great discussion. Yes, the good news, it's recorded. So when you come back to Project Control Academy's LinkedIn page, sorry, on the video side, you will find the recording. So make sure you get back to it because we covered a lot. Also on our YouTube channel, the recording will stay forever. So yes, the recording of our LinkedIn live sessions or live broadcasts are always available. So that's a good thing. So we also have Ferrondo saying, very good session. Glad to hear that. He's from Brussels Airport. That's great. And here is, I'm not sure if it's a comment or question. So Dimple said the session has provided me with invaluable insights into how project controls can be seamlessly integrated with contract management. This knowledge is critical for reducing risk, fostering collaboration, and guaranteeing project success. Yes, definitely agree. So thanks for wrapping that up. I appreciate that. Let me see if there is any more questions. Yeah, they're all great comments. Thanking you, Ali. So before we wrap up, do you have any final comments or final advice for the listeners on what they can do to incorporate some of the things and some of the strategies that you've mentioned, either from the contractor side or owner? I know we focus a lot on the owner, but if someone is from the contractor, do you have any advice for them as well, or any final thoughts before we adjourn the session? I appreciate that, Ali.
For sure. I would say if I'm going to talk about contractor side, because I've been on the contractor side for many years, and I think when it comes to career planning, it's better always to start with the contractor. You would learn way more, and then going to the owner side. But But when it comes to contract management and so on, no matter you are on contractor side or owner side, make sure you educate yourself and your team very well. And you don't need to face the issue to learn it. So you can definitely find good practices in place to apply ahead of the time. So make sure you do your research on good practice. I'm not gonna talk about best practices. To me, there's no such things as best practices because every company is different. You need to find a good practice and actually apply it internally into your system. And there are things that you can't do it because of the structure of your company, and there are things that you can do. So at least cover those and finding a good reference. Again, I'll reiterate the same message of recommended practices that we have in AACEi. These are really good practices. Definitely go there. If you are a member, you would be able to see all of those practices, and some of them are also shared for non-members, I would say, but a very good, very strong practices in place. So I would definitely encourage everyone to look at those if you really want to see the integration of different knowledge areas. That's where we fail. So if you don't integrate, we fail. There's no way to in this world to be really in silos. Silos are gone. So you really need to be integrated when it comes to systems, practices, softwares, human being, human interactions, and so on. Integration is inclusion is all important, and go find those practices, I would say, and try to implement them, and don't try to learn it to implementing of the job. So.
Great comments. I just noticed I lost some of the, because it was a big comment, I lost some of the great question that Dimple asked. So if you don't mind me asking,
Sure.
you also mentioned earlier at the beginning about the software that you were using. I think Dimple is also asking, are there any specific tools or software solution that you recommend for effectively merging project controls with contract management? I think it's most principles, right? But I remember you just covered some software or tool, if you can just
I can talk a little bit on the software, and so we should have a different conversation on software and like which area we're going to cover with that software, right? So there are technology is different. So if you're dealing with a huge civil work and aggregate is a big deal, so you probably need to use drone, and we have used drone recently on a really large mega project, Site C dams and dam and hydropower plant. It was really successful, and cameras are also important. But you're talking about software, and I would say I'm just going to focus just on the contract management side of it, and it's really important to know your estimated completion in your contract. So I know this is a cost or forecasting subject, but it's applied to the contract management too. So when you are dealing with large contracts, I was dealing with $3 billion contract, one single contract, 3 billion, another one, 3 billion, another one, $500 million design and build. So you really need to know the estimated completion at any time, but monthly, I would say, when you're going to share it with the stakeholders. So how do you do that? So it's better to have a software. And so we use Unifier. I'm not sure if Unifier is the best tool to deal with that when it comes to contract management, but the concept, I'm going to talk about it, and you can utilize any tool in your site, and feel free to build it in-house, because I've seen that it's basically easier, unless you have the license, and you can deal with the detail of the software. But what you need to know about your EAC is the exposure that you have. So is there any risk? So there are contemplated change orders that are in place. There are changes that you envision, but you don't tell your contractor right now because you might be handed it down though. So you need to have one area to just log all your contemplated change orders. And then this is basically your risk register coming to a value, like turning to a value in your contract manager, that these are the risks that might come up. This is my exposure. The other side, so you have actually a first column, which is your original contract value. You have on top of it any change orders you have already settled. So this is now the current contract value. And then you have two wings here. One wing is basically your contemplated change orders, all in-house risks that you have envisioned or you have got it from your contractor, but it's not yet coming through a change order or any claim discussion. So this is called contemplated change order. And then the other side or other wing is your claims that you have received, all notices that you have received that you need to quantify that. As soon as you add dollar value to this risk and to your contemplated change orders and put it on top of your original plus all change orders, which is the current contract value, then you would get your EAC of your contract, estimated completion of your contract. So do it in any software, but this is the most important thing in managing the risk at contract level and having an updated package every month. This is one of the software for contract management, at least managing the risk and values, exposures, claims, number of claims, how you log it. So you can have different type of columns there. And you can have traffic light there, how long this claim has been with you and you haven't settled that. Then that would trigger a different story with your senior managers and so on, and different decision-making processes.
Wow, this session is full of insights that I don't want this to end, although we've been 20 minutes over. So thank you so very much, Ali. You shared on a topic that it's a gray area. We usually don't take that much attention into, or bringing project controls into the contract. That was something really, really well explained today. So thank you so very much, Ali. I really appreciate that. I just saw a question, and people want to see how they can be in touch with you in case they want to continue the conversation or have any question. So I assume it should be on LinkedIn. So we will tag you on LinkedIn so they can be on LinkedIn. But if you just want to add to this question, then you're welcome to add.
Absolutely. No, I think the best way is LinkedIn, the most professional way these days. I think
Yeah,
I
sure.
would suggest LinkedIn.
But I have to say, Ali is very busy, but really, really amazing in providing his insights. So, and from the moment we met at AACE International in Chicago, he was willing to contribute. And when he brought up this topic, I said, yes, we want to have this discussion. So I really enjoyed this session. Thank you so very much, Ali, for your time from your busy schedule to be here with our audience, with our global audience, and sharing your insights and sharing great strategies with us. So I highly recommend everyone to go back and revisit this, because he shared a lot of insights on this topic of integration of project controls into contracts management. So thank you again, Ali. Just before we adjourn, I just want to invite everyone to join us for our annual conference next year, Project Control Summit. So we would love to have you. Hopefully, Ali, we can have you there too. It's going to be next year from April 29 to May 1st. So hopefully everyone can join us too. So I just want to extend my invitation to you, Ali, and to everyone who is joining us here live, to hopefully we can see you for more insightful conversation like today, and in addition to the excitement and meeting great industry leaders like Ali at the summit. So hopefully we can see everyone there. With that, I would like to adjourn the session. It was really great session with you, Ali. Again, thank you so much. A big shout out to everyone from all corners of the globe who joined us today to learn and invest in your learning. I hope this session provided a ton of value to you, and I hope you can incorporate some of these strategies that you've learned in your project or in your next project. So with that, I see you hopefully in 2 weeks with another live broadcast with another expert. I think in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about cost estimate reviews. So stay tuned for that, on strategies on how you can do proper reviews of your cost estimate. Thank you again, Ali. I appreciate you and look forward to being in touch with you, and hopefully see you in Galveston for the summit.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.